Hey Liz, hey
Hi.
Lauren. How are you guys doing today? We're
Good.
pretty excited about this conversation about the five secrets for a successful implementation. So let's just, I told you we're going to have just a very casual conversation and then see who chimes in, who wants to jump in. So for anyone that's in the audience, if you want to jump in, just let us know in the chat or put your thoughts in chat. We'll bring that up. We'll invite you up. And if you want to, if you have your cameras on or if you can't be on camera, we totally understand you can do it just with voice. But join us on the stage if you feel there's a conversation that could be really pertinent to this discussion. So we also want to address, the fact that we're going to be at Alliance and we're going to be doing the main stage, and there's a set of conversations, including a student um, intensive that both Lauren and Liz are going to be leading. And the reason that we decided to do this, we thought that it would be a really good way for us to almost seed some of the conversations for that intensive on Sunday. So if you're coming to Alliance, definitely join us on Sunday when you register. Just add this on. You may get an invite also. Last year it was a packed house, right, Liz? Like we had a lot of people. It was almost like
It
standing
was.
room only. And so I would encourage you to join. I'm not sure what the limit is, but I think we had 60 last year or something like that. We want you to join. So we're always aligned in our mission to make the hug better. So this is part of our activity that we're doing. So Liz and Lauren, why don't you give some background? Maybe Liz, you can start this as to how we got here around the topic of when we think about a successful implementation, and also we're thinking about the intensive we're going to be doing in March in New Orleans. Um, Give us a little bit of background, and then we'll dive into maybe the five. Maybe one of you could articulate the five that we're going to talk about, and then we'll go into that conversation. And maybe
Yeah.
for the audience that doesn't know you, maybe it'll give a little intro.
A little intro. Well, I know we were messing around with our tags under our name, and I know you are more than somebody at Beyond, Matt. You're one of our partners. So I think we can all attest that we know who you are. I'm Liz Powell. I've spent over 25 years in higher education, either as an implementer or actually in your chair, sharing the work that you do every single day, working in financial aid and student accounts. And so, super excited to be here with you and to be with Lauren. We'll let Lauren introduce herself, but this talk does come out of the conversation we had at Hug or Alliance, however you are choosing to call it, last year, where we talked about when you move houses or when you are going somewhere new, you usually do a clean out. You take that opportunity to really look around and evaluate everything that you have in each room, all the stuff that's been in boxes in the basement that you've never actually looked at. And do I take this with me to the next place? I have a client that we work with who was like, I'm moving cross country, and do I take all of these things with me? No, I leave them behind. And so that was our conversation last year. We talked about how functional technical people are also changing the landscape of how we discuss systems and software and all of our goals that we have within higher education. So this is going to play on what we did last year. It's going to give you a little sneak peek into what we want to talk about at Hug this year. And our topics are data hoarding in academia. I know we all love our data. We love our data warehouses. We love our analytics. We have a lot of reporting that we don't have any other option other than to do on an annual basis. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to also talk about from trash to treasure, right? So how do we actually take the data that we have and we make it work for us, right? Rather than we are working for our data. System of systems. So we've had lots of conversations, especially on this platform with Matt and other people about, the idea that in SIS is that a something of the past? Do we start looking for systems that are best in class that we can bring into an ecosystem, where we then allow students to consume data and information without knowing what system it's really coming from? And lastly, we want to talk about operational transformation. So, how do we continue to evolve and transform and make sure that we are using the tools, the best and the newest tools? So, agents, AI agents, use AI to accomplish tasks to free up time for you. So, that's what we'd love to discuss. Lauren, if you can introduce yourself, and then I think you are going to pick up our first topic, which is
Yep.
data hoarding in academia. So we can kind of get right into it.
Perfect. Great. Liz, I loved your example, by the way, of moving cross country in those boxes, because I'll tell you, some people, and it will go with my first topic of data hoarding, will say, well, I'm not sure, so I'm just going to take it with me. And there's a cost, right, to moving that box, especially if you've hired a moving company to transport it over. So definitely want to have that conversation. But just for folks to know, my name's Lauren Wass. I've been started off on the student records, advising, registrar area. So it's a nice compliment to Liz, who's on the money side. I always look at it and go, don't make me accountable for the money. I just want to register students, make them happy, do things like that. Let somebody else, charge them and fund them. So my background's there for a number of years at a variety of state institutions. And then actually Matt and I crossed paths many years ago and went over to consulting and have been a consultant now for, 15, 20 years, I guess it is. Doing implementations as well as like business process improvement or those phase next efforts that never got done during their implementation, and clients are ready to take on that work. So it's been my background.
Lauren, as you all dive into this, I think one of the backgrounds that I think is really important for us to set is that implementations have been done the same way for a long time. So Lauren, you and I have been in this space for a long time, and Liz has been in for the last 10 years. Like, things that we did historically has kind of just been mapped over. Now, data is even more critical now because of us going into AI and the ability for AI to streamline all the things that we're like thinking about, right? So we're going to talk about that later. But I'd love for us, whenever you have the conversation about these points, what was the reason why we did something then, and why should we be thinking about it now? Because I think the winning secret is not to just do what you did in historical implementations, but the positive elements that we can move forward with the future implementation. So I want that backdrop for our audience to be prepared to even have a conversation around.
Great. And totally we'll add this. Folks, feel free to put things in the comments if you disagree or even agree with us. I see Freddie has a little note out there. And, if you'd like to come on camera to debate us or have a chat, you're perfectly welcome to. So data hoarding in academia, I will say the registrar folks, especially, just don't want to give up any data they collected at any point in time as they move to a new system. It could be a new SIS. It may be some other piece of software you're implementing and utilizing, maybe moving from one point to another. And folks are like, well, we want to just move everything. And really, there's a value to that. And it is wondering, what are you going to do with it? What's the value add? Because you're just adding sometimes junk to your new system. Because data, if you've collected it, and I'll use SIS predominantly as my examples, because very often those at this point, if you're looking at changing SIS, how long have you been on your current system? 20 years? 30 years? Maybe even longer for some schools that really adopted quickly. I bet some of those fields, what you put in there, the values have changed over time. You may not have kept those values up accurately. And the cost to convert that data is very expensive when it's not accurate. So I really tell folks, what do you need it for? Why? What's the purpose? Because your SIS especially is transactional. You really just need the data that you're going to transact against. Data doesn't disappear.
Yeah. So Lauren, when you talk about transactional, so this is historically when we went from like a mainframe system that had a system, you were actually just repeating what your mainframe is into the new ERP. You were mapping it. It was an easy exercise of what that is. And you were even configuring, in a lot of cases, customizing it So it did the same things that your legacy mainframe did.
Right.
But
And now
today the cloud is different, right?
it is.
And the definition of those data elements might be different because the cloud, because it has philosophies from many different institutions that built that logic of that process, it may have different value, or the way it processes it might be slightly different. Can you explain that a little bit to the audience, especially the ones that are still on the ERP ecosystem and
Yeah.
not in the cloud?
So a lot of them will challenge, oh, I want to bring everything over a student ever did from the moment of application. I want to recreate the application and bring them all the way through. And this student is now a junior. They've changed majors multiple times. All that. There is no value in bringing over that application as it sat in your legacy system. There's no value. And how that would process in the new system may be very different. All you really need to do is recreate that student as they exist today and move them forward, because you really are going to transact against their current major, what classes they have had, the most up to date, things like that. But I don't need to know that, oh, when they applied, they were a pre-med major and now they're sitting as an accounting major. There is no value to that. And so it's really looking at that data to say what really matters that we're actually using on a day-to-day basis going forward. We're not going to lose the old data. It's not, I have yet to hear a school that has moved systems and taken their old system the day they went live and turned it off and threw that database away. Not a single school has. I will guess schools still maintain it for 10 years just to have it as a reference point.
I think the reason that they're afraid of that, there's a sense of fear, right? So maybe consultants have to kind of explain this to them. There's a fear that if you don't bring it over, you can't report on it. You can't validate history on it, right? There's reasons why that certain things are done, and that's why they're afraid. So
yes,
how do we remove that fear that they can get reporting? There's accountability, there's accreditation. I can name you all the reasons why someone would decide to go a different route.
Get to some of these along the way, but there are options of doing data lakes or data warehousing, and I think a lot of schools don't think about that as at the time they implement their system, realize afterwards, shoot, we need something that works better, because a lot of these modern systems are based on transactional only. They're not set up as data warehouses, so reporting off historical data is not something they do great here and now. In the immediacy, they do wonderful. But when you're trying to do, census reporting, you don't do that out of a modern sys. You usually push that to a data warehouse. You're taking a snapshot, things like that. And so that's one of the ones I look at. I look.
Wait up. Did you just say that the cloud products doesn't do everything that is promised? Like, come on,
It's promised, but it's just, I think people go with this vision that it's going to be this whole new world, and it's a different focus, and it's a tool that's unique the way you use it, and you've got to adjust.
Can I ask Liz, who comes from the accounting world and all that, what's the fear on that side? I know what the records people fear, like I just kind of mentioned it.
Yeah.
What is the financial, if you don't bring it? And I know that a lot of times we don't bring a lot of accounting over. And then Freddie, I'd love to understand from the IT side, why are you afraid on the IT side for not bringing some of that stuff over? Go ahead, Liz. Any thoughts?
I have two thoughts here. So from the accounting side, we are going to close out a financial aid award year in, whatever system that you had your financial aid calculated in the year before, right? So you will not bring anything over. You will be banking on the fact that records, registration, academic foundation was all built correctly so that you can calculate financial aid brand new in your new system. Student accounts historically has had some reasons and some rationale for at least needing historical data to be left somewhere. I've been around long enough to have had the Department of Ed call me because a student was contesting that they had Perkins loan payments that were past due, and they said they never got a Perkins loan. They had no idea. They didn't sign a promissory note, right? And I've had to go into deep into the archives in the basement of some building to pull that out. So I think historically there have been actual reasons around student loans to maintain that kind of documentation. But again, we're living in a modern age. It is 2025. We can scan those things in. We can, we can make sure that we've sent something off to Iron Mountain. It doesn't need to come with us to a new system per se. That data and information can live somewhere else. My second thought in kind of the conversation you and Lauren were having is that I don't think we do a really good job as consultants explaining to schools the importance of an entire team coming together to really understand what you need. And I'm going to go into this in Trash to Treasure, but what you need from a data perspective. So I think oftentimes we look around and we go, well, who really uses the student information system? All right, you guys are in charge of this project. And we don't go out to institutional reporting. We don't go out to academic affairs. We don't go to IT. And then everybody sits down at the table to say, what data keeps us running? What data elements are helping us to meet our goals? And I think once you kind of distill that down, you can have a much better understanding of what needs to go in the student information system.
And Liz, I'll kind of add that you've got to take your personal beliefs out of it. Because I worked with a school, right, that wanted to, and this is from a student financials aspect, had students that owed money back in 1987. They last attended the school. Now they were doing their new implementation post 2020. And the student had a balance from 87. They had written it off at this point, never had made another transaction on it, but yet they wanted to bring it over, and all that student's records then had to come over with them into the live system. And I said, why? And I even looked this person up to say, well, what's going on with them? They still lived in the same town. It was a small college town, and were blocks, had a master's degree, and were practicing their profession blocks from campus. And I was like,
yeah,
if you haven't paid it, they're not going to at this point, and you're not actively collecting the debt. Why are we?
And most of the time it's true. Like most of the time that's true. It does take a lot more thought than than like you would theoretically think to actually do that. There needs to be funds in somebody's particular account to make a write-off happen. I have had a client where I did not realize until I went into the state statute and rules, they actually were not allowed to write off balances. So yes, they had balances all the way back to the 70s that was very important to them to bring over. We were able to make sure that we brought that stuff over, not as a quote unquote active student, if you will, in the system.
But you did your research, is my point. Like you knew why, and it wasn't just, well, we've always done it this way, right? Because that's why people need to bring their facts and their rationale to the table, right? And if there is no real rationale, there is no state law or federal law that mandates that XYZ needs to happen, then you need to have a deeper conversation about why that piece of information is vital to bring over. Exactly.
So Freddie, what do you think? What's the IT's, concerns about not necessarily, or are they more prone to not bringing everything over?
I got to tell you, I don't think IT is going to be as excited about a discussion about data as Lauren and Liz are. So, look, from a technology perspective, technology should follow what the business needs anyways, right? So the business has operational requirements, institutional requirements, reporting requirements, etc. So what's the best way to enable that? Where IT needs to be very careful is to not be dragged down into the governance component or the cultural component, right? Because once you start talking about data, you really should be talking about, which is the point that you just made, Liz, or Lauren, I forget who it was. Do you know the data that you own? What data do you own, right? So the governance part, I think, is extremely important because that kind of determines the pathways of what makes the most sense. But from an IT perspective, look, you can put almost everything in a data warehouse and report off it, including operational data, right? But it's that we got APIs, we can enable anything really. So, but those discussions about how do we go from A to B really gets down to to culture and ability to make decisions that make sense.
But would you all say that if you're thinking about an implementation, one of the first thing is identifying the data warehouse or the source of data where everything is collected so that at least you know it's there, it's going to live, you're going to be able to report, you're going to validate, then go into a cloud, or do you do it at the same time? Which approach are you thinking?
Personally, it helps if you've thought about it ahead of time of what you plan to do when you sunset your legacy system, whatever that legacy system is. Where does that data go? Because even if you convert it, as Liz had mentioned, right, you may have someone from a government official, an auditor, coming in and asking you, and you want to see the original source, maybe because of the audit trails that exist that you don't get at time of conversion that you're going to need. So this is where IT does come in too, to say, what's our strategy? Because you might have licensing issues or things like that. And how can we access that data? Where it might not be the same UI on the front end, but we can get to the database, we can access the data and pull what we need. Most schools don't think about it till close to the end of their project. Oh, shoot, what are we going to do? And it really should be, I think, ahead of time and already thought about, because building a data warehouse for student is very difficult. I have yet to see a school, HCM and Fin products, very often they come off the shelf somewhat preceded with data and ways to handle it. Almost everything from student needs to be built from scratch, and that takes time to do it well and do all the mapping. So it definitely, I vote ahead of time. I don't know, Freddie, Liz, what is your experience?
Yeah. I think it has to be done ahead of time just because of the mapping, right? If you're coming out of a legacy 20 or 30-year-old system, and I would even go out on a limb and say, and I haven't seen all of what has been built out in the last few years, but even going from, say, a PeopleSoft on-prem to a PeopleSoft SaaS, or going from Banner on-prem to Banner Ethos, right? You're going to have some level of mapping that is going to have to occur. And you're going to need to have thought about that ahead of time. And because it could require a new build out of your data warehouse, right? Your data warehouse may not, as it exists today, may not actually meet your needs for the future. And that could require funding, that could require a project, and then require some skilled mapping long before you really get into a project. So I agree with everything for sure that Lauren said. More time, the better.
Yeah, it should be done beforehand, but I mean, when it gets to the point of why implementations are so hard and why the landscape is littered with failed implementations or implementations that not lead up to the desired outcome, which is that it's not just a technology implementation. It's not, right? Your student information systems and all the associated systems around it is a digital representation of how your organization functions, the good and the bad, right? So if you look at the things that need to get done for an implementation, this Beehive is called five winning secrets. A lot of it has to do with change management, with ownership, with governance, with culture, ability to execute, the right sponsorship. I mean, I can go on and on and on. Now, those things are actually hard, but they should be done beforehand, which is why, at Beyond, what we believe is that, look, when you're doing a student information system implementation, it's not just about the vendor. It's not just about the tool. That's only a small component. There's a lot of things that you can and should be doing beforehand. But that's hard work, right? And what Assist provides is a sense of urgency to get things done. But as we know, because it's a bread and butter to a certain extent, including cleaning up afterwards. Look, there's a lot of great conversations and opportunities. And actually, you know what? Let me finish with that. There's a lot of opportunities of making things a heck of a lot better than just implementing a new SIS. If you start looking at these policies, your procedures, your structures, your people, etc., beforehand. Because once you start, the pressures of a regular implementation are going to be so high. There's so much to do. You might not get to it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that leads us really nicely into, trash, from trash to treasure, right? And I think this is, and Bill, this goes to something that you just brought up, like, why do we hide from the big picture, kind of conversations? Because I think that it's too big. It's too much to do all at once. Who's going to run this project, right? Who's in charge of absolutely every single division and every single group? Some schools have, offices that go to the controller, go to enrollment management. Some IR sits separate. IR sits under IT. It just, everybody has a completely different structure. So that's why I try to distill this idea of trash to treasure. This could be a large overarching project that is run by one of the groups I just talked about, or you could take it upon yourself in your individual space as a leader to begin to look at, what are my KPIs? What are the goals? What are the strategic initiatives of the organization this year? How do I distill that down to what I'm trying to accomplish in this office? What's the data that is going to get me there? Right? Because having a conversation with a leader and bringing true data points to them, it makes that conversation typically go a lot smoother than if you just say, I don't have enough personnel. I don't think we're going to make our numbers. I have no idea how we're going to, upgrade our billing system and make it more interactive for our students. Unless you're bringing data and information to those folks, it's going to be really difficult. So write it down. Just as an individual, other people will follow. We've all worked in higher ed long enough. We realize someone from another office is going to go, whoa, that is really cool. Where'd you do that? How'd you do that? So figure out your KPIs, your goals. How do those meet any of the strategic initiatives you might be involved with as an institution? What data is vital? So just break it down, literal data points. And I know it's hard because we all live in the nuance of what we do every single day, but there are actual data points embedded in there if we get rid of all of the nuance and we look at the 90% of what we do and not the 10% that consumes all of our time. And then I would say pull in data governance, pull in institutional readiness, right? Ask them to help you as you're building out your document for your office. Ask them to take a look at it and from their perspective. How is what I'm documenting going to help us at this organization? And then map your process and your systems to those data points. And are they still meeting your needs? Are they serving you? So I'll pause there.
And you make some really good points, right? And I always wonder why people don't do it. So, because some of the things are like, oh, you know what? It's real obvious that we should do this. We should invest time in it, especially if you're about to go embark on millions and millions of dollars to move to a technology that's supposed to enhance your campus in so many different ways. And yet, this critical work of data, identifying it, what the outcomes are, what the keeper, like you would think that would be the first thing they do in investing. But right now, they just jump into an RFP, they jump into an implementation, and then they're like, what are we doing here? Because that's an old mindset. Like if people are doing that, that's just you're doing 1990s implementation models because you're just trying to move legacy into a new mainframe, a new system, and you're configuring. Well, that's not the way the cloud works. And that's the importance of this conversation. Because you have financial aid, you have student financials, you have admissions, you have all these places. And as much as we talk about HR finance, the amount of people and data that we will touch inside of student is massive. It's four or five times greater because the number of people and their needs, their data, all that is really important. I say this because I want leaders who are going to be listening to this to understand if you're about to go spend 50 million, don't shortchange the work that needs to be done in order for you to get value from that 50 million. Because if not,
you said, why don't people do it? My answer is it's not sexy. Doing this data work that, we're talking about and trying to get people to align with IR and across campus is not flashy, but standing up a new SIS, right? Or a new interface, a new product, that's where you get to put the balloons up and, everybody gets screams, shouts, oh, look at how great it is. Announcements on LinkedIn, but no one looks at, is it really working? And if the data is not right, you're not going to have a great system, right? At the end of the day, it's not going to operationalize what you want. But folks don't realize it's a lot of hard work to get there. And they're sold by the vendors too of no big deal. And that's not true. Not true. It's a lot of work.
Well,
Yeah,
and I think too, institutionally, you know, and I come from a long list of pretty prestigious institutions, and it's really interesting how much more, and I worked in corporate America as well, how much more driven you are towards the data in corporate America to justify everything that you're doing and everything your team's doing and all the things that you're asking for versus higher ed, where you're almost never driven back into the data, and hence IR teams are so small, but they're actually really vital to the organization, right? Like they're the ones who hold the key to understanding what data is actually driving your organization to success. And so I think if we are putting people in places of power and leadership within divisions, within higher education, and I'm talking, you know, your registrar, your bursar, your head of academic affairs, those people, we should be expecting more from them. We should be expecting them to actually be distilling down the strategic initiatives of the organization in any given year and building KPIs for their team based on that. Okay, how do we help this organization meet their strategic goals this year? Because we're vital, we're important. I think there's a little bit of, I'm going to be controversial here, there's a little bit of an accountability issue. I think sometimes.
little malpractice I always vote for. Hey,
Mm-hmm.
so I want to just set this up and see if you guys agree with me. You know how Lauren, you said it's not the sexy thing that, and that's what it wants. Well, think about when a a rocket is, space shuttle, whatever it is. Think of it going up. There's a lot of things that are so minute and so small,
Mhm.
but so critical for that rocket to be successful to go up. And now with SpaceX for it to come down, right?
Right.
So people and if you don't do those things, it could be catastrophe. And
Yeah.
that has been happening in our SIS's ERP and finance products because they're not doing the small things that require that rocket to touch back down.
Right.
Right? It's going up and it's exploding because they're not doing the things that you need to. I hate to say it that way, but I want people to realize this. When you say it's not, people don't think it's important. It is important.
It is.
And it's the things that nobody sees that are important that people are failing on. That's why implementations are struggling, whether it's financial aid packaging to finance,
Woman, anything.
yeah, enrollment,
Yeah.
anything, right?
Totally. I totally agree with you on that, Matt. That you really, all those little lines, and again, they're pushed against windows, right? That there's certain windows where you can go live with functionality in student that you don't have that same pressure on HCM Fin. And folks feel like, well, we've got to make the window. And so they will cut all the corners they can in order to make that window. And in some cases, you've got to be willing to accept we're not ready. Right. And if it is there, or how do we adjust? And it's not an easy decision. But again, if you do the work ahead of time, it's less likely to happen, right? All that testing, all those little pieces they go through, testing cycles and everything else of all that, those small minutia will help avoid some of that. And that
even though a lot of people will never feel ready. It's a nature of the beast as well.
But it's like having kids, right? Like if you waited till you were ready to have a kid, you would never have children, right? They don't come with a book. They don't tell you what their personality is going to be.
Some people are not ready for kids either, right? So that's the thing they have to realize.
Well, exactly. Yeah. But you do it, right? You take that leap of faith. There has to be a level of trust that the folks that are trying to help you, that the leaders who are leading you are doing that in good faith. But I think I think my big soapbox today is you have to take control of your own universe. If you have been made a registrar, if you have been made a bursar, even if you're one lower level below that, take control of your own office. If you think everything else is chaos, then bring it in and take control of what you own and your role in the chaos, right? And so that means that you go in and you clean up your data. You look at the systems you're using. And if they're not meeting your needs, stop trying to cobble it together. Make a case for going to get something different. It might actually save you money. I was recently talking to an IT leader who just saved about $100,000 moving to another vendor, right? And that vendor's actually meeting all their needs and met all the, the requirements that they were looking for, that they were just cobbling together somewhere else. It's a lot easier than trying to think, you have to be able to see the forest for the trees, but you can only control where you live. And so I would say bring that in, assess your office, assess your goals, assess the data and software that you're using. And I think that brings us, really, I would love to hear other people's thoughts on that, but it brings us, Lauren, I think, to talking about system of systems, right? The student information system is not the end all be all in an IT architecture, right?
No, but I want to address Bill.
It used to be. It used to be because
It used to be.
it was the one system that everyone used to turn to, and that's before we had engagement and experience be really important,
CRMs
right?
and
If before all that. So in the old days, So you have to reflect on when you think about this move. It is an important move. It is the heart, like JTH said. It is the heart and lung and liver of an organization, but it's not the only. There's so many vital organs that are going to be required in this process. And so we look at it from a system of systems architecture, because I'll be also we're also going to unhook the vendors from over promising and under delivering. If we start to architect this properly, we're not asking the vendor to over promise anymore, because hey, if you don't report well, just tell us you don't report well. If you don't communicate well, tell us you don't communicate well. If you don't do AI well, that's okay. We'll wrap something else around it. I think, and then you got to price this accordingly too, because right now, when you go and spend everything on the one SIS or the one ERP or the one HR, you're now taking all the funds away from the system of systems architecture that needs the investment, needs the time. So the activities you all are talking about, you need time. It isn't just money, it's people's time that's as important, and not everyone has time.
So one of them, Matt, I wanted to look at what's in there about the, it's not just on the schools, but on the vendors and the implementers, and that comment that's out there. And I look and go, your implementers especially, they have one job, right? Their job is to get the software standing up. And they will ask you, the client, right? What are your requirements? Give us your requirements. And from that, they build based on the data you give them. So really there's a little bit more onus on schools to be prepared and be ready to come in, because the implementer is just there to, put the house together, right? If you think of it that way. Your vendor maybe is your GC, right? If you're thinking from a house building, they're coordinating, maybe they're helping you pick a vendor, SI that's going there. But you need an architect, and you need to have that design plan before you do any of that work. And if you don't have that in place, it really doesn't matter. It's not, you're going to fall short of what you expected regardless. And I wouldn't hold it on my, implementer, AKA the plumber, right? That he doesn't know how many bathrooms I want, and I want double sinks over there. And, it's going to be a steam shower or whatever. Like, I have to tell them these are all the things I want. And I expect them to be able to respond that to tell me, hey, that's not code, or, these are things that maybe you need to have happen. But this planning work is definitely not on your vendors or your implementers at all.
No, this is what we talked about at Hug last year. Exactly what you just discussed is when you buy a piece of land and you want to build a house, you don't go find subcontractors. You don't go find electricians and plumbers, and you go find an architect. You find someone who's actually going to show you what it looks like to have a room here, or make your kitchen a little bit bigger over here. Or do you want walls, or do you want an open plan living room? What you want, a second floor? You want to bump out? What we want, a deck? What do we want? And then you go find your subcontractors to actually do the work, do the plumbing, do the electrical, put in, you find a subcontractor for painting, for floors, for all of the pieces, right? That would translate to work streams. But you do need an architect. You need someone to show and guide you and help you put your vision on paper. And I think people, to your point, Lauren, they skip that.
And by the way, in industry, and in industry, guys, this happens all the time, right? Mm-hmm. So for me, the number one, I know it's the five winning secrets. For me, number one, this has always been the case. The school needs to own the project. Full stop. This is your project. right? And by the way, when we say your project, it needs to be the business project, the institution project, not IT. It's the business project, right? So first of all, what we've seen and the kind of the industry standard is a school will hire a vendor. Sometimes a vendor is also the implementer, but most of the times it's not. So when I say the school needs to own the project, that does not mean that you should outsource that ownership to your tier 1 consulting organization, whichever organization that is, right? You're hiring them for expertise, obviously, but you still need to own the project. Now, why do I hammer on this so much? Because I've seen it where the school is still out of the loop because, well, I'm not thinking about that because I hired Matt, right? It's like, no, you can't, Matt should be asking you, we should be asking you, we should be informing you, but at the end of the day, you own the project. That is extremely important. And from that flows almost everything else.
Yep. And I think this is the one, and I'm not going to say I'm going to push back on you, Freddie. When you're spending $200 an hour, $300 an hour from a consultant, while you own it, you should expect things from them too, Freddie. Right? I'm not like don't just defer it to like I have to make the decision. A lot of times, clients themselves, they don't understand what really needs to happen in the cloud because they don't understand the cloud. They don't even understand what another school may do, a certain process a certain way, right? So part of this is you have to own the implementation. That means you have to educate yourself using the consultants that you have, that you're spending a lot of money on. If your consultants are just moving you from legacy to a cloud system, I would tell you, you're wasting your money. It's not what you should do. Your consultant should be guiding you through these conversations that say, hey, have you done this? Why are you doing it this way? This is the better way of doing it. Like the reason you bring in consultants is that you're going to be educated. So I would say own the education and then make the right decision on it. I want to make sure I didn't leave the consulting parties because they're spending a lot of money there. These 50 million isn't going to the vendor alone. That 50 million is going for consultants that are sitting in your office who are clocking in 40 hours. And you're like, okay, what do they do for that 40 hours? Do they just configure? Do they just tell me that what I have in this table works in this table? I'm like, okay, is that what you're really paying consultants to do?
And that's what a lot of SIs really just do. That is when you really get down to the statement of work you're issuing, that's it. It's really just
that's why I want to ask you, Matt, like what is the expectation? What kind of consultants are you talking about? Right. Because I think the folks that are brought in, because I have a theory out there that you don't need as many hours as you have if the client comes prepared, right? So you're worried about the hours and you want to know, okay, well, what is the outcome? But the hours are burned because clients take months to make decisions because they never thought about it until that moment that you brought that topic up. And then they're looking at you for guidance. You don't want to leave them in the lurch. So now I'm just burning hours on explaining to somebody what could have been done months and months and months earlier. And they just came prepared with their requirements. So I have a theory that, frankly, traditional consulting could move a lot faster if clients were actually doing the pre-work that they need to do and they knew exactly how they wanted to build their house when the builder got there.
Yeah.
What I would say is what occurred and what is occurring now is that implementations have absorbed the consulting, right?
Mhm.
So implementation for me, when I say I'm implementing something, I'm basically building, configuring, and putting in a working product. It's like building a house, right? So that's what we're doing. But what has now is happening is the architecture, the design, all that is happening during the build process, the configuration process. So what happens is the people, the builders, the ones that are configuring, the testing, they don't even understand what your vision is. They don't understand the data mapping of your legacy system. So what occurs in the current implementation methodology, and I have said this before, implementation should be much cheaper. Why? Because you're consulting of what your architecture should be done way before you actually sign onto a vendor and a SI's path to a product line. right? I would say if you're asking consultants to be waiting for your decision on something else, you're burning clock. You're burning the clock of everyone that's sitting in that room. That's why implementations are $50 million.
Yep.
The actual implementation should be much cheaper because all you're doing is building. You already know the architecture. You know the 5 values that you're going in. You should know what you're testing. All that should be there. So what happens is you should take the amount of time that you're going to save, and you should do that ahead of time. But it's not sexy because it's not implementation, but it is implementation. It's to make sure you're successful in the implementation, right? I would say to you is, I want schools. I'd love to just put the schools out, and I know who the schools are, who are struggling right now. And I would like to be able to say to them, do you want to be them? Because that's what we're saying. You should do this ahead of time so you're not those schools. But everyone wants to feel like they have the winning theory of, oh, we're going to do it better because we're planning it and we're going to do it. And the reality is, if you're doing it in implementation, it's going to be costly. You have the wrong consultants because those consultants only know the software.
Right.
Remember, just because you're certified in a software doesn't make you a good consultant. It
Right.
does not make you a good consultant. And I need people to realize that. If they know the software, but they can't tell you why prereqs are done a certain way, why tuition calc, why billing types a certain thing. Like, they don't know. They haven't
Well,
even
and it doesn't mean
understood.
that they've sat in your chair either. It doesn't mean they've been a registrar, they've been a bursar and can help you actually figure out where
Yeah.
the industry is going and how to transform. I think we're saying the same exact thing. I guess my question, worded differently, is who are these two different groups, Matt, or are you seeing them as the same group? Like my same vendor bifurcates the project into this pre-work, getting me to architect and understand what I want, and then they bring in another group to actually do the building? Or are these completely different groups? Is this Beyond comes and always does this, and then there's
It's not
this
even-
other group,
Yeah,
right?
it's not even Beyond. There's people that could have these conversations that don't. Why? Because there are people who do the technology element. There's the implementers, which is the box of people. So I have these, and there's a circle, which I call strategy. The circle people that do strategy encompass the whole campus on everything you're doing. It isn't just the SIS. Then the triangle is the people that just focus on the process. They come in and look at your as is, and they look at, like, and I would tell you, when you're looking as is, and then you're going to go into an implementation, you're just going to replicate legacy. So I would tell you, ideally, you should always hire people to architect you for the vision. Then you pick the right vendor and software, because it isn't just one software. It's multiple. It's a system of systems architecture. It's the right data that these people. Then you do the implementation. Then, you know what? Bring the right experts who are certified vendors that know a product, that knows how to configure it in that way, and then you design. So I think, and that implementation, and vendors will love for me to say it, it should be a fraction of the price. Right now, the softwares that are being turned away is because your implementations are too expensive. But most softwares could be absorbed by most schools, but their implementation is too costly at this moment. And that's one of the biggest problems.
Costly. And Matt, I'll say, and this is kind of going to that system of systems point we wanted to touch on as our fourth point was, your old SIS, you probably were able to highly customize it, add bolt-ons and do things, and you got away from what the core of the project was, right? We always tease that there's certain schools out there that took one of these, large scale boxed systems, and it no longer is recognizable by anybody as the original system because they've changed so much. And so understanding what you're really trying to do and what should be in your SIS or what should be in your CRM product or what should be wherever, and build that system of systems vision is more important. Then yes, when you go to your SI, they know what your vision is, right? That I need to integrate to this system. I look at schools, and the one that I've seen, the one product I've seen where schools have gotten this is probably around Slate. All the schools when Slate first came out, and it's now become much more adaptable. Schools realized that's for admissions. I've never had a school say, we want to do Slate to handle alumni. No, it's always recruiting and admissions. And it's a great tool for that work. And it works with a lot of other, SIS systems or wherever you want to pull data, but it does that really well. And you're even seeing vendors now of SIS systems saying, we're not even going to push our admissions thing. Go ahead and use Slate, or go ahead and use Element 451. I know is another one coming into the market that's very targeted to what they do. And so when you really look across and go, what makes sense that should be in a student information system, that transactional pieces, when you think of the key offices they're geared for, right? Bursar, financial aid, registrar, maybe advising. Some people would debate whether advising is in assist or it should be a standalone. But when you do that and you work with a school to work with someone to design that piece, it makes it easier, right? And then you can decide, okay, what's the experience my users have moving between these systems? Because I think that's the other piece that we always have to think about when you do system of systems is, I don't want to have to log in as an end user to 3, 4, or 5 different applications. How is it seamless? And how do we connect this system of systems for our users that they're moving back and forth, but maybe they don't have any idea where it's really going, right?
So there's a time check.
Yeah.
Yeah,
time check for 10 minutes.
Time check,
and
10 minutes.
We have
2 more topics.
Yeah, well, that's
more
what I want to
topics.
get to the next one, Matt, for sure. But I also want to address, as we get to the next one, Nicole's comment. They feel like as an institution, they did a lot of pre-work, but they still felt unready for what their partner was stepping them through. And I think this is why I was kind of harping, Nicole, on Matt, like who are the people that come in and do this? And I do think as someone who is an expert in old mainframe systems, but then also moving to and having implemented both client side and as an implementer Workday, I would say you have to make sure you're actually bringing the right people in to have these conversations with you. The conversations we've had at one of our clients are very specific to the system that they were moving to. And so we were able to do pre-work with them, knowing what system they were going to potentially move to, and knowing that we could help them to bridge and map those things. And I was even with the client last week, and we were trying to whiteboard things, and they're throwing things out. And I said, we have to start using our Workday words so that when we are talking to our implementers, they're understanding us and they're understanding what we're trying to accomplish and achieve. So I do think pre-work is really important, but I think it also is really helpful once you do know what vendor you're choosing, that you kind of loop back to that pre-work that you've done and make sure that you're starting to align and map to where you're going. And maybe something you thought would work that you had achieved for a particular office, all of a sudden now, because of the system that was chosen, it's done completely different. You have to come back and reevaluate and reassess the decisions that you might want to make. So it's not a perfect science, because oftentimes you want to do this work before you've chosen a vendor. But I do think there are people out there that can help to consult once you know what that vendor is.
And one thing, and this is to address Nicole, who addressed that, hey, my implementer is moving us through these steps. We're not even prepared. Because those implementers' goal is to configure your system in the methodology that they are certified for. They're not all, and I'm not sure who they are. They're not readily prepared to move you through the transformation your campus has to happen with people, process, other integrations, other steps. This is why people are not prepared, is because all those things have to be thought of. And so when you come in and do an implementation, they're on the clock. It's like a chess. They're on the clock, and you have to make that move. And if you don't make that move, it's going to cost you. It's going to cost you a pawn. It's going to cost you a rook. You're going to lose it because you're on the hook. So the pre-work, everyone's going to say readiness and pre-work. It's out in the market, and everyone thinks that readiness and pre-work is this technology readiness and pre-work. No, your pre-work is campus transformational pre-work. That requires it, and that's the difference. So when you think about pre-work, it isn't readiness for your software, because the reason that people don't feel prepared is they're not ready for the campus transformation. That pre-work hasn't been done. So I know we have 2 more topics, so I'm going to let you guys go.
Operational transformation, Matt. Yeah, I mean, it becomes a campus transformation, but really, you have to break it down into bite-sized chunks, and that's your operational transformation. That's, going through and working with IT to do system mapping or business capability mapping. It's that stuff that Lauren said was not sexy. But about people who like analytics, they're going to think it's really, really fun. So set them on it, right? Make sure that you're fully communicating to IT, these are my existing needs, and this is where I'm trying to go. Set a cadence, because again, it's not sexy, it's not fun. We're all super busy, but dedicate some time to yourself while you're at work to review the systems that you're using, review your KPIs and your data points that you're using to achieve those KPIs. Make sure that you're setting new goals for yourself and your students. And I don't mean just the like annual HR goals, like, oh, this is what I hope to achieve this year. It's, sit down with your office. What are we actually trying to do? What are we trying to achieve? What worked well last year? What didn't work well last year? Are there other pieces of software out there that can help us to achieve these things better? And start evaluating all of those things, and give yourself dedicated time to do that. It shouldn't be a once every 5 years. It should be maybe something you do, biannually. Lauren, did you have any thoughts or?
No, I think you kind of covered a lot. And I want to make sure we get to our fifth one. I know we're down to a few minutes, and I know the last one is that future proofing, right? We talked a little bit about this transformation aspect. And I know, Matt, you are passionate about this topic completely. And, what do you see? Because we're all hearing AI, and of course there's ChatGPT, which is a form of AI, but not all of AI.
So I look at everything through a future of work lens. What is the work of the future? What's the technology? Today, it happens to be AI. In a couple of years ago, it was blockchain. So I'm always using the more latest technology to transform the work that's in front of us. So in the AI opportunity, AI is just telling you how is going to transform the way you work. Wait till agentic AI, where it actually is going to allow the computer to make the decisions on behalf of you. Just think about that statement. How many people will trust that, right? So part of this exercise is us going through this and seeing which use cases benefit from this. Now, every vendor, whether it's ServiceNow, Salesforce, Workday, Oracle, Ellucian, you name them, right? They all are having the AI conversation, which I applaud all of them, because I think you're going to need it, because the configuration, the CRUD model of, create, read, update, and delete models that we're all on right now, it's going to go away, because we're not going to configure the same way, because the intelligence of these AIs are going to do what the logic and algorithms of our current systems are. So as you start thinking about new implementations, you better have an AI lens to it. Otherwise, you're going to go configure a system that drives, something so basic, where this AI is going to do much more effective. I'm actually excited to look at every one of those vendors' AI strategy, because I think we could then change the way we work. And that's what we do at Beyond, right? That's what we do in any good consulting firm, you name them, is going to change the way you work, because that's why you're hiring us. And I think with AI, I will tell you, all our clients, whether they're in Ellucian, Banner, Oracle clients, they're all going to get improved, because we're going to use AI as a part of it. Now, think about think you guys do this with us. Our AI in our project management is totally transformed. The way that we manage, the way that we put out things, the way that we produce things is done because Ro and his team make us an AI group. Well, I want to bring that to market too. And I think that conversation, if you're only going to focus on implementation of just configuring over, you're wasting a lot of money, a lot of time, and it's going to become it's going to collect dust. If you start to look at AI, you're going to change the way you work, and that's what we should do. We shouldn't work like I did in the 1990s in your current system. That's what you're doing when you put a registrar system in today, because the registrars, and I know Freddie said, "Oh, you got to own it." Their registrars don't know the difference of what they're doing today or what they should do in the future. We got to educate them on that, and that's the future of work lens that I always talk about.
And I think even if you take a step back out, and I'll be fast. If you take a step back out and you're not talking about AI embedded in a piece of software, just think about if your campus has actually started rolling out pilot programs for AI, whether it's Gemini or Copilot or for Microsoft Shop. Where are you storing your data and information? And how can AI then access it? So if you have a beautiful SharePoint structure, then it may make it a lot easier to put in an AI agent, right? That can answer questions for your office, for students, or even internally, like, hey, where is this policy and procedure that we built 10 years ago? But just on a very basic level, remember where you're storing all your documents and your artifacts, because that's going to be vitally important if you do try to build an agent.
And I want to add, Matt, one thing that she said it's really key is folks are afraid of AI, right? I hear this from our schools. They're like, it was kind of like when we first implemented SIS, I'm going to be out of a job. And the answer is no, you're not. But it's going to change the nature of the work you do. It's going to take it away from this dull, data-driven, answer the phone, and you have this long line of students, or students are waiting on the phones or trying to get in through websites, and optimize the human interaction experience to be more valuable. And then the things that are data-driven, know your sources, right? You've got to keep those up to date and say, hey, when we implement AI, where are we pointing it to? What's our, dictionary of data? Where are we sending it to? And are those up to date? Because I know right now from working at schools, what the policies were in the registrar's office, let's say on enrollment. And when you went out to the colleges and schools had their own sites, they didn't align. But AI is going to maybe pull all that together, and you don't end up with data, right?
The statement I'll tell you. AI will make implementations more cost effective. So you're going to have firms that use AI to implement you, and they're going to have firms that don't. And the ones that don't use AI in their project management, in their configuration, in their assessment, and all these things, you will pay the price because they're going to do old models. And that's the difference. You're going to find implementers that use AI and consulting firms that use AI that's going to drive you just a different way. It's going to be faster. You can think differently. And the statement here is we want to take the robot out of the human, because we want the human to do real human work. So if your system is still making human do robotic work in your SIS, in your CRM, in your LMS, in your Slate system, all that stuff, if you're making them do robotic work, you're failing by failing to use AI in the way that it needs to be done. So, hey, we're already at the top of the hour. This has been a really fun conversation. Thank you for the folks in the chat that were chiming, William and JTH and others. So and Nicole. So appreciate that. Any closing comments? A little bit right now. Gabrielle is not here, so she's not telling us to close shop or anything. So we got a little bit of a leeway. Any last thoughts from you two, and then let's close up. And we invite everyone to come to the Hug and see us at Alliance. We're going to be at Main Stage. We're going to have these topics at the student intensive. We're hoping you'll be there. And then, of course, there's these 3 tracks that are going to be really pretty cool at Alliance. One of them is the SIS modernization. One is project management AI that we're going to do at Alliance. So, and I think that's the kind of stuff that, and of course, leadership and C-suites and everything else that we'll do with the Hug group. So we're hoping you all will join us. But I'm going to let Liz and Lauren cap it, and understand why you should be sitting out in their student intensive on Sunday afternoon.
I will add just one thing. I think is, a lot of these SIs are selling readiness work, and really take a look at what you're getting with that readiness work. Is it this type of work we're talking about comprehensively of your processes and your people and those types of things? Or is it really just your SIs getting a head start on your implementation? And that's really all it's focused on, is implementation driven. If they're stepping away from that, looking at it holistically, or are they just looking at your product, really look at what you're signing and what paperwork that is. And Liz, I'll leave it to you for the close this out since you started us off.
I would say, your SI is coming with the most earnest intentions, but you do have to remember what they're there to do. And they are on the clock. They only have so many hours per work stream. So they will help you. They will answer your questions, but you do have to realize you're burning through some hours at that point. So if you have the opportunity, just do the things we were talking about. It's really about data stewardship, and it feels really, really big, I think, because data feels really big. But when you distill down the data points that you need to run your office, it's actually a really, really finite number of data points. And you just kind of need, if it helps to just start with that list, make that list, and then start associating it to the goals that you have and how you're helping to meet the strategic needs of the institution. So I would say start with yourself and the data stewardship for your own office, and then start spreading the word once you've kind of built a good template that you think works well.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you at the next Beehive, and we'll hopefully see you in New Orleans.